Joining me also on the phone line is Rajdeep Sardesai, our consulting editor. Rajdeep, while many, of course, are talking about the economic reforms that he was a part of as a finance minister and more, do you think it's also an era in many ways that Manmohan Singh signifies?
Oh, absolutely, Pooja. I must confess that I heard this news while I was sleeping overnight. I'm in Australia, so 5.5 hours ahead of you. And when I heard of Dr. Singh, I thought of the personality and the person that I knew more than the politician. And the person, Pooja, was a man filled with goodness. It's a strange quality, often underrated in this world. But the soft-spoken, self-effacing Dr. Singh concealed a man who was fundamentally decent. And Pooja, that's the value, as I said, which is underrated. And I'll give you an example of it. I remember once writing a stinging editorial in a column that I was writing on Dr. Singh's and his government's handling of the 2G auction. A few weeks later, I met Dr. Singh at an official function, and I looked at him, and he smiled, and he said, Rajdeep, you've raised some very important points in your column, I see. Not one word did he have to admonish me or suggest that, why was I criticizing his government in such a stinging manner. And I think in that, you can understand the kind of man he was. You could call him an accidental prime minister, maybe even an accidental politician. He was more an academic, redolent with scholarship. But at no stage, Pooja, throughout his long career in public life, did he ever fail to be unfailing. He was always unfailingly polite and dignified. And I think that stood out for me. And it's a lesson for people in public life and even in their private spaces, that you always retain your personal dignity through good times and bad. And I think that, Pooja, for me, will always stand out when I think of Dr. Singh. He ushered in the path-breaking economic reforms, yes. He brought in the very tough Indo-US nuclear deal, tough to manage and handle because the left was his coalition partner.
Correct.
But through all those tough times, he never gave a sense that, he was being unduly pressurized or that, he was someone who was doing something very special or historic. He always saw himself as part of a larger picture. And therefore, I think he was truly special.
Rajdeep, you also met him because for the books that you've been writing, and you've had a personal connection and interaction with him. Do you think that in many ways that the kind of man that you're describing, happy with the books in the academia, than the politics and political and the power corridors that may not have attracted him as much, even though, of course, he's been a prime minister twice, but it was somewhere around the lines of the books that he was a part of? What would you think, according to you, from his political career, personal career, perhaps two big decisions that you think defines Dr. Manmohan Singh?
Pooja, it has to be 1991, the economic reforms that he was part of. And I emphasize the word part of, because remember, Narasimha Rao was the prime minister at the time, and there was a team that was built in the finance ministry, the likes of Montek Singh, Ahluwalia, Shankar Acharya, and many others who helped shepherd those reforms, and the 2008 Indo-US nuclear deal. Both were hugely challenging. Remember, there was a section of industry and even political India, including the Congress party, that was opposed to the reforms of 1991. And in 2008, his partners in the left were opposed to the Indo-US nuclear deal. But Dr. Singh was able to build consensus through dialogue, through sheer effort. I think one thing that stood out for him, very few people know, he was enormously hardworking. He never made a fetish of the fact that he was hardworking, but I think from the days of academic scholarship, he learned the importance of self-discipline. And I remember in one of my last meetings with him, it must have been 2 years ago, he was visibly aged, and he started speaking very movingly of the days when he had escaped the scars of partition, and he had studied and through scholarship managed to sort of eventually reach Oxford University and Cambridge University. And, he was getting emotional, and his wife, Gursharan Kaurji, who was there, suddenly stopped him and said, Sardaji, ab chai pina hai. And, it was almost as if that was the one time I saw him get emotional. Otherwise, he's remarkably hardworking. And when you're so hardworking and self-disciplined, I think you're able to handle some of the pressures of life. So even whether it was the economic reforms or indeed Indo-US nuclear deal, I think because he was someone who was fundamentally committed to nation building, never putting self before nation, I think those will go down as some of the lasting memories of Dr. Singh for millions of Indians who today are the beneficiaries, Pooja, of Manmohanomics. We are on private television doing this interview because the economy opened up post 1991. Let's not forget there are 2 or 3 generations of Indians who've enormously benefited from the unlimited opportunities that Manmohanomics provided. Millions have been lifted out of poverty. If you ask this to Dr. Singh, he would not take credit for it. He would say he was part of a process. And I think that's something that was the hallmark of the man, and which is why he was able to endure in the coalition age. Had he pushed himself forward all the time, I think he would have struggled to survive. But he remained Prime Minister for 10 years because he never pushed himself forward. Yes, I will say this, Pooja. I think maybe in hindsight, he could have retired in 2009.
Correct.
He had just had a heart surgery. His heart was failing. And then all the sins, in a way, if you want to call it, of UPA2 were almost heaped on him and in some ways scarred his legacy. I remember asking him whether he had ever thought of resigning, and I do know for a fact, and I want to say this today, that during that ordinance, during the issue when Rahul Gandhi waived the ordinance, tore apart the ordinance of the Manmohan Singh government, Dr. Singh was abroad. And he did want to resign at that moment. This was, I think, 2013. Very few people know, and I'd asked him this. I'd put it in one of my books, but Dr. Singh was ready to resign. He didn't in the end. He was pressurized to carry on. Maybe he saw it as a duty. I think in some ways he saw even being Prime Minister as some kind of a duty, much like, academic. In that sense, it was part of his sort of mantra of life. Ki jo kaam diya, wo sahi karna hai, without wavering. We will miss him, Pooja, because I will miss him because whenever I went to him, I learned a bit about life. More than about politics, I learned a lot about life from Dr. Singh. And one of those things is zealously guard your privacy and maintain your dignity in public life.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. Rajdeep, one last question. Many people, of course, know him as Finance Minister, Prime Minister. I often think of that child from Partition. And, to start life afresh, leave everything behind, and then to go on to become the Prime Minister not once but twice of a nation, today about whom Rahul Gandhi says he's my mentor and guide. And Rajdeep, to which even Prime Minister Modi, despite of course the whole political bickering and criticism, also did say that he is a distinguished leader and his insights were important in the parliament. So do you think that, of course, political affiliations or disagreements aside, whether Rahul Gandhi or Prime Minister Modi, that there's been a certain respect that has come in, that he is being a distinguished leader in our political fraternity?
Pooja, as Dr. Singh himself said in his press conference in 2014, maybe history will judge me more kindly. And I think history will judge him more kindly. These have been very turbulent times. It's very difficult handling a coalition government. All the pressures that are put on you, particularly when you don't have a large majority in parliament. And Dr. Singh took the country through those tough times. The economy between 2004 and 2009 was at one of its highest growth rates ever. And politics is a continuum. I would like to believe that Narendra Modi, in his own way, has taken forward the baton that was handed to him by Dr. Singh. Very different political figures, but let's not undermine Dr. Singh simply because he was soft-spoken and self-effacing. As I said, decency is an underrated virtue, Pooja, in public life. And Dr. Singh truly exemplified a certain decency, which is why the people around him respected him. He earned their respect. I think it's important to recognize that. He earned their respect. He would work long hours. He was never pushing himself forward. He was always ready to acknowledge a team effort. I remember we once ran a jingle, Pooja, Singh is King. There was a famous song at the time, and this was after the Indo-US nuclear deals. One of his advisors rang me up, "Are kya kar rahe ho? Please don't push Dr. Singh forward. He's not Singh is King. He's just one member of a team." Can you imagine someone saying that, not wanting to take credit even in one of his finest hours as a politician? That was the man. That was Dr. Manmohan Singh, and that is why he will get the gratitude and the respect of an entire generation of Indians, including his peers in politics.
And that's democracy that India is proud of. We've had leaders of all kinds, and people have had the experience to have prime ministers of all kinds as well. Thank you very much, Rajdeep, and I hope you'll get some time off for your holiday as well. He's joining us from Australia right now, because remember, these are times that a journalist has spent with over the years and has seen the country change, and therefore perhaps those experiences and a perspective coming in. Rajdeep, thank you very much.